So welcome everyone. Anyone who trickles in, feel free to come towards the front. My name is David Weinstock. I graduated from the college in 1993, and I have the distinct honor of serving as the moderator for this. I think we should have as informal a discussion as possible. I'm going to ask each member of the panel to give a brief, or not even that brief, introduction with a description of who they are and how they became that person, maybe beginning with their time in the college or even earlier. And I think that can be very illuminating as far as the somewhat circuitous path some people can follow into a career in healthcare. And then depending on the time, I may ask a few questions, or we may just open it up to all of you to ask questions. I've found, I will say one anecdote, that advice is not generally that useful. So some of you may ask questions like, what do you advise I do to get into medical school, or so on. I happen to be sitting next to a very lovely woman at lunch today, one of your classmates, and I asked her how this panel went last year, and she said, oh, it was great. One thing they did was they had each member of the panel give a piece of advice. I said, oh, that's interesting. Do you remember any of the advice? And she said, oh, no, I don't remember any of the advice. And so what we're going to do instead, I think, is try to share our stories and any thoughts, and hopefully answer some of your questions.
Good afternoon. I'm Tor Alden. I am a pediatric neurosurgeon at Ann and Robert H. Leary Children's Hospital of Chicago, and also at Northwestern. I went to UC and started as a chemistry major. In truth, I did not like the pre-med students, and so I tried to take every class that wouldn't allow me to associate with them. And so I took the harder physics and harder chemistry and that kind of stuff. And then I actually took a statistics class because I thought it would help me in grad school in chemistry. I ended up liking statistics more, and I took more math and stats things. I switched my major to statistics. My dad is a physician, and I thought he is the only one smart enough to be a physician, so there was no way that I could do that. So that's why I never even considered medicine. And then I went to Berkeley for grad school in biostatistics, and while there I realized everything I liked about biostatistics had to do with medicine, and finally gave in to my parents, who said, wow, Tor, you really should be a doctor. And so I came back and went to Rush Medical College for med school. And then during med school, I thought I would be I initially thought I was going to be just a pediatrician, then I was going to do med pediatrics, but I found my true calling was actually in the operating room, and I really enjoyed taking things apart and putting them back together when I was a kid, and so it was kind of a natural fit for me to be a surgeon. And then as I was telling my group at lunch, I was actually going to be a pediatric cardiac surgeon, and at the end of med school, I met a neurosurgeon while I was interviewing for cardiac surgery who said it'd be crazy if I did anything but neurosurgery. And as it turns out, he says that to everyone, but I took him at his word, and I did a rotation there, and I ended up loving it. So I switched after I had matched on a track to be a pediatric cardiac surgeon, and went down to University of Virginia. And then I did a few fellowships in St. Louis and Seattle, and did a year in New Zealand as part of my training, and then here I am back in Chicago. And then the only other additional thing that I do is I'm the Chief Medical Informatics Officer at our hospital. So I help govern our informatics effort, including the electronic health record and other optimization and enhancements that we can gain from that.
My name is Ariel, and I graduated from the college in 2002. And right now I live in Washington. And my dad is also a doctor, and my mom is a nurse. And so I grew up with a worldview that the way to help people in the world is to help improve their health and help make healthcare better. And so I showed up in Hyde Park thinking I would be pre-med, and something in the pit of my stomach said, don't sign up for Gen Chem. I'd done well in high school, in all my science classes in high school, but there was something that said, like, this is not it. Like, I seem to care a lot more about words and people than those big science textbooks. And so I said, well, I don't know how I'm gonna square these things, but I'm just gonna go with it. Here, you know, human soc, and I was really interested in French literature, and I like struggled in those first couple of quarters how I was gonna break it to my parents that I hadn't signed up for the science classes I told them I was gonna sign up for. And in the end, I went down the road, I became a political science major, and that, you know, I took the advice that a lot of people will give you, which is if you wanna figure out what you wanna do in your career, do some internships. So after in my second year, I sent emails to a gazillion organizations, because I cared about human rights, and I cared about women and women's health, and I met a woman whose husband was on the faculty at the University of Chicago, who worked in New York doing international women's health work, and she needed somebody who spoke French to translate the surveys that they had gotten from one of their studies. And so, just as it happened, I spoke French, and I was interested, and so I had this internship, and I learned that there are all these people in the world, public health experts and policymakers and advocates, whose mission is to improve healthcare, and they don't do it by providing direct services to people. That was tremendously liberating. And it turned out my mom got a degree in public health while I was in high school, and so I should have known that there were these other careers, but I hadn't really made the connection. And so from there, I was like, oh, I don't have to be a doctor. I don't have to go to medical school. Here are all these other ways that I can advance health of women. So I continued to do that through college. My last quarter in my fourth year, I became a part-time student, and I worked downtown at the Planned Parenthood clinic, which was really, if you've ever kind of worked in a direct service setting, you know, those interactions with patients can be really gratifying. And then when I was finished with college, I moved to DC because I had a sense like, okay, so there are people in Washington who use policy to make healthcare better. And so I went and worked for a small advocacy organization, also working to advance women's reproductive health, and learned about kind of how the Congress is involved and what role the executive branch had, and what it took to really get meaningful change, to improve women's access to care, to improve family health, to educate people about what their options are. I really loved the work, and I realized at the end of my time there that I just didn't know how it all got paid for. So that was an indication to me that I needed to go back to grad school, and so I got a master's in public affairs at Princeton University, and there I kind of spent a lot more time thinking about health systems and public financing and how all that works. And when I was finished, came back to DC to work at the Medicare program, which if you had asked me several years before, I would have told you was like the least sexy, least interesting place to work. But what I learned is that the Medicare program ends up being a bit of a policy laboratory for healthcare, and that when people in Washington want to change the way healthcare is provided around the country, they pull the strings of Medicare. And so I spent some time working there, and the skills that I used to do the work that I had. First, I was a special assistant for a woman who ran one of the major programs. I ended up having to do a lot of writing and not primary research, but pulling together research from other researchers and explaining it to people who didn't have time to read all that research, figuring out how to pull together skills from lots of people who have technical expertise and translate it into words that policymakers could understand about what their decisions would be. And that all led me to my current job, which is actually over in the legislative branch. So I work for a commission now that advises the Congress about Medicare. And the reason that the Congress needs a commission to advise it is because the Congress is made up of 535 regular people. You know, they all have different sets of expertise that they bring. But 535 regular people are not really the people that you need to manage a huge health insurance program, which is what the Medicare program is. And so they have a set of experts from around the country, including physicians, people who are in hospitals, managed care companies, who come to DC to hear analysis that's presented by analysts who are my colleagues, and deliberate and make recommendations to the Congress about what to change. And primarily they use the levers of payment policy to do that. And so it's my job actually not to be the generator of that analysis, but to translate the work that my colleagues do into words that congressional staff, who are the ones who write the laws, it's not the members of Congress, as I always believed, the congressional staff and reporters and industry groups and interest groups who are involved in the Medicare program. I'm the liaison with all those folks, and so I kind of haphazardly ended up down this road of thinking about Medicare payment policy, and I'm in touch with hundreds and hundreds of people, including physicians, whose job it is to think about using the levers of public policy, the levers of kind of the commercial space to make healthcare better. So, I spend all my days thinking about, how do we make access to care better for Medicare beneficiaries? How do we improve the quality of care that they get? And then, lastly, how do we get the best spend for the taxpayers' dollars? So, I'm always really motivated to come and speak on this panel because as a student, I didn't know at all about what anyone did in Washington and about the kind of ways that I could be involved in healthcare without being a direct provider of services. So I'll stop there.
So my name is Carrie Fallon, and I'm an occupational therapist. So I graduated in 2009 from the university, and I was a psychology major. So kind of my story, like many of you, I came into college knowing I wanted to be a pediatrician. That was, I wanted to work with kids. I was interested in healthcare. That was kind of what I wanted to do. So I started off on my little journey, and second quarter into Gen Chem, I was like, I might be one of those that they get. Like they might get rid of me. So I, had a major crisis, and I called my parents sobbing, and what do I do? And this is what I've always wanted to do, and I feel like a failure. Kind of a little over dramatic, but when you've had a dream for so long, it's hard to think of doing something different. So they supported me, and I was loving my psychology classes, just absolutely loving them. So they said, Carrie, why don't you just take a break from Gen Chem and finish out the quarter, and we'll pay for tutoring and get you through it. And but then it's okay to start thinking about something different. So one night, this is not glamorous, I sat down on my computer. I went on PrincetonReview.com, and I did one of those little career quizzes where you fill out your personality and what you like to do, and occupational therapy came up, and I had, like most of you, have probably never heard of it, unless you have a child or somebody who's needed services. So I started reading about it, and I thought, wow, this is really, really interesting. So I kind of started doing some more research. I was looking into, okay, what are kind of the academic, what kind of degree do you need? What are the opportunities? What does the job field look like? And it looked really promising. So I decided to start doing some shadowing. So I shadowed some people in hospitals. I worked at a camp for kids with disabilities to kind of get an idea of what that career would look like. From there, I kind of hit a point where I said, okay, there's really no major for this here. So how am I kind of going to move forward with this? So I was able to kind of look at some of the prerequisites for programs. UIC was a top 5 program in the country, right a couple blocks away. So I started kind of using them as a guide. Like, okay, if I wanted to go there, what do I have to do? So the nice thing about the university is I was able to, there was some physiology, anatomy, cadaver classes that I needed that I didn't feel like jumping in with second-year bio majors. I'm like, I don't want to jump, midway into a sequence, into a class. So I did some research. I was able to do those classes at Chicago State, actually. So I just went south. And so I was able to graduate early, which is really kind of a nice thing about U of C. A lot of people have the opportunity to do, and finish those classes in the spring. So kind of through, being able to use the class at the university, and then as well as kind of combining with some of those classes at Chicago State, I was kind of able to make my own program in a way. So that's kind of my little putting advice in already. But if there's something, a career that you're kind of seeing and you're thinking, well, there's no major for it here, you can absolutely kind of tweak and find your own path, because there is a lot of flexibility with kind of the university's scheduling, and being able to kind of graduate early, things like that. So I was able to go ahead and do that. So I then applied to UIC, and I got in, so I chose to go there and get my master's. And it was a great experience from there. I now work, I have to tell you what occupational therapy is because most of you probably don't know. So when you work as an OT, you work in the rehabilitation setting. So you're working with people who have either had an acquired injury, a disability, an acquired illness, and you're working with them to restore or build daily function. So for example, if you work in a hospital, you may work with people with spinal cord injury, stroke, traumatic brain injury, any other kind of neuromuscular disorders that may come up. From there, you're teaching them, how do I eat again? How do I bathe myself? How do I dress? How do I do my job duties? How do I take care of my child kind of with this new body? So that's kind of if you're in the rehab medical setting. You can also work in outpatient, so you can work with upper extremity injuries rehabilitation, like rotator cuff, carpal tunnel, hand therapy, things like that. And then for me, I actually work in pediatrics, and that's really where I had my passion, was working with kids with disabilities. So I work in a school, and I work with kids who have autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, learning disabilities, and behavioral and emotional disorders. So it's the same premise where I'm working with these kids to build or restore their daily function, but it just looks different. So in a school, I'm teaching kids how to write, how to cut, how to put on their coat, how to get stuff out of their lunchbox. How do I play on the playground? How do I play with blocks so I can play with my friends? So it's the same premise, it just looks very different depending where you are. So you're really just working with these kids to teach them those daily skills that are impacted by some sort of developmental, neuromuscular, or neurological disorder. So that's kind of what it looks like on a daily basis. So I've worked for a co-op for the last 3 years, and I work with children kindergarten through 5th grade, and I work with kids at an alternative school for severe emotional and behavioral disorders, as well as just a regular ed school. So I kind of get a nice mix of a lot of different kinds of clients. And then I also see children on an outpatient, just a private basis, just at a clinic, because I have extra time now. But yeah, that's kind of, it was not where I envisioned I would go, but I am really happy I'm here. So.
Great. So just briefly to tell you my story, I graduated from the college and then went on directly to medical school, then did internship and residency in internal medicine, then did clinical fellowship in oncology and infectious diseases. And so then, 9 years after leaving for medical school, I was, I think, fully clinically trained, but I decided that I would go in the laboratory, mostly because I just didn't really understand the laboratory, and the people who I had met along the way who I really respected were the ones who could do everything. They could see a patient, ask a question, bring a sample or a question back to the laboratory, and try to do discovery biology to then inform how to best treat either that patient or more likely the next one who came down the line. And so I kind of started over at the age of 28 and didn't really like the lab at first because it was hard and it was new, and but after a while I just loved it. And so now I do about 80% of my time running a lab. I have about 15 very smart, dedicated young trainees who work in my group who all want jobs like me, like mine, and jobs like me just makes it sound like they just want a job, like I have a job. And about 20% of my time I spend doing clinical oncology, mostly bone marrow transplantation. All right, so I think I found in the past in these panels, one big question that comes up is what's your day like, or your average week, and there's always this issue around work-life balance. That's a term I hate, because I think that may be great for finance people or something who do their job and they want to get away from it. But a big part of going into healthcare is deciding that you want to do something really important and meaningful in your life, and so work and life are sometimes sort of merged together into one. So maybe you could start with kind of what's your average day, your average week, and how do you balance things?
Sure. So I have kind of the nice thing of working in a school, so I do have school hours. Lots of my friends are very jealous. So, you know, it's a pretty 8 to 4 job. And then obviously I see outpatient clients on the side. I could see as many as I want. There's a demand for it, which is really nice. But I choose to just do that 1 day a week just for that balance you were talking about. But yeah, I show up to work and I see about 10 different kids a day. So I'm literally showing up, and 9 o'clock rolls around, I go and get my first kid, and depending on what their individual needs or goals on, we'll run a therapy session. So a therapy session is anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, and we're working on fine motor skills, strengthening functional motor skills, and then I bring them back to class. So it's kind of the nice thing is my day never really looks the same. Kids do that. They make sure that it's never routine. They always have something for you. So that's a little bit more of my structured school, where I'm kind of just seeing kids back to back and just kind of meeting their therapy needs. My other school, where it's for emotional behavioral disorders, I'm more just integrated into the classroom because their problems kind of happen just trying to exist in a daily routine. So I'm just kind of in their world, trying to help problem solve with them real time. Kind of, right, you're frustrated that you're having trouble writing, but you probably shouldn't have thrown the pencil across the room. You know, what could we have done differently? So that one's kind of cool because you're really just kind of in their environment all day. So really, I'm spending most of my time with kids, but I would say I spend about 20% of my time with adults. So I'm collaborating with physical therapists, with speech pathologists, social workers, parents, administrators, teachers. You're very much kind of on it. You're on this team and you're all working together. So a lot of our time is in problem-solving meetings, and this is going on, what can we do about it? Or I might ask the PT, I'm seeing something in the way he's walking, have you seen this? Does this concern you? That sort of thing. So you're about 80%, 90% with kids, and then you're also collaborating with your team. So every day looks a little bit different, and that's kind of what's fun about it. They keep you laughing. So.
You know, it can vary from day to day, but on the average day, I probably spend 2 to 3 hours talking with congressional staff, either briefing them on information that the commission I work for, you know, about things that the commission has recommended, or educating them about some topic in Medicare that they've expressed interest in knowing about. I probably spend another few hours meeting with outside groups, physician organizations or hospital groups, or other kinds of healthcare providers who want to come and educate us about how they're seeing the Medicare program working. I also spend a lot of my time helping to prepare the chairman of our commission. Often testifies before Congress, so you know, in fact, just this Thursday, our chairman was testifying at the Energy and Commerce Committee, so I'll write the testimony that he'll submit as his written testimony and help him prepare questions and think about anticipating what members of Congress are going to want to know about. I also help to manage the staff in the organization, so helping to figure out who needs to be involved in various projects and bring those people together and motivate them. So that's sort of what I do in the office every day. But one thing I think that's important to think about that, you know, was kind of a revelation for me a few years ago, which is that, you know, you can choose a career and you can do work that you feel very proud of and self-identify with, but that doesn't have to be the only thing that you do in your life. And so once a week I teach a yoga class at a local yoga studio a few years ago. I convinced my boss to let me take every other Friday off for 6 months and do my yoga teacher training. And that's been a really great way to find balance, because it's totally different than what I do on a day-to-day basis, and gives me a lot of satisfaction to be involved in a different way and in this mindfulness practice. And then the other thing that adds to my day is that I'm a parent now, and I have a 1-year-old son, and so I spend a lot of time learning and playing and discovering, and you know, it's this, you know, this whole new job that I didn't get any training for before, and so, you know, where I am in my career now, there's a part of me that's saying, like, advance, do something else. You've been at this organization, you know, for this many years, and there's another part of me that's saying, like, wait a minute, you are developing your career in a different way as a parent and otherwise. So.
Are you on email all evening, or do you turn it off?
I try to turn it off. One thing that's nice about the agency where I work is that it's pretty much kind of a business hours kind of thing. Except for when the Congress is really in the height of policymaking. Rarely does someone need me at 10 o'clock at night. And there's a lot of parents who work at my organization, so I try to turn it off so that I can talk to my husband, or, you know, read a book that's not about Medicare policy in the evenings, but it's hard. I multitask a lot during the day.
I'll tell you my week, because each day is pretty different. My chief medical informatics job, I take Monday mornings and Tuesdays as my meeting times. We start at the hospital every day between 6:30 and 7, some days we have 6:30 a.m. conference, some days it's 7. I had always hoped as a resident that when I became an attending that I wouldn't be at the hospital at a ridiculous hour, but unfortunately that didn't really work out. So I start at that time, and then Monday is my late day where I have clinic out in the suburbs, and we do outreach clinic out there, and I usually get home about 8 o'clock at night. Tuesdays is meetings, so I'm usually able to be home by about 5:30. And it's usually an afternoon of really terrible meetings, listening to people talk about informatics and that kind of stuff, when you never want to have an important meeting late in the day, and unfortunately that's where all those meetings are. So my attention span can drift a little bit, and hopefully this video will not get disseminated back to my hospital. The Wednesday is my clinic day, and it varies as to where it is. Once a month I do a brachial plexus clinic where it's specifically for patients who have injuries to the nerve in the arm where they essentially can't move it, and we do surgeries to repair that and make them move their arm again. But most of it is just general pediatric neurosurgery, which really involves the nice thing about neurosurgery is you can operate on anything because the whole body is the nervous system. So we do brain tumors, we treat people who have excess fluid on the brain, we'll do spine surgery to take out a herniated disc or correct a misshapen cervical spine. We also will operate on people who are born with what is a tethered cord, where your spinal cord is stuck down low and you lose your leg function, so we try to fix that. And then there's the peripheral nerve, which is the nerves in the arm and leg that allow us to move. We sometimes do surgery on those. And then Thursday is my operative day, where and it's also my call day. So once a week, I'm on call every 4 days, and that's Thursday, and then I'm on call every 4th weekend. And it's variable as to how busy my call is. This past Thursday, I was up all night and had to operate on a very young child who had a large brain tumor in the middle of the night. And then Friday is also an operative day for me. But I try to get home, or I try to have that be a lighter day than my Thursdays. Because of the work balance thing, I have 9-month-old twins at home, which for the first 4 months, I don't really remember anything about that because I was getting up 4 times a night, my wife and I were. But then we brutalized them with sleep training, and now they sleep through the night, whether they like it or not. Yeah. So we, but they go down to bed early at 6 o'clock, so Tuesdays and Wednesdays are the days I try to get home to help with that. Mondays I can't, Thursdays is variable, and Fridays I do my best to get home. Before kids, I did try to do some other things. I took actually a creative writing class at the Gleacher Center, a U of C production, and so I tried to do things like that. Now there's not a chance in the world that I'll be able to do that because I think my wife would actually murder me. I wouldn't say, she wouldn't actually be so kind as to leave me. She would actually just end it. So, and then my call on the weekend depends on how busy it is, but that can also be variable. We do interact with, since I'm at an academic medical center, we do work with residents and fellows, and medical students, and of course University of Chicago students, because we have I do the externship, but so we spend time with students, and then sometime in there I also do clinical research. I had attempted the lab but found that my work-life balance wouldn't really work that way, so I do clinical research. I think that's it.
So the thing I really love about my job is that it's varied, and so I don't have a typical week, but over the course of a week I might spend some time with people in my lab talking about their science or writing a grant or a manuscript, something like that. But we also might have a teleconference because we're trying to build a improved way of diagnosing lymphoma in Malawi right now. And so we have an ongoing push to develop what's called a U54 program with the NIH. I'd say I travel 60 to 80 days a year if you put together all the meetings. And one of the wonderful things about being in science is that you make friends all around the world. And so it's not unusual that I'm on at least 3 and sometimes 4 continents over the course of a year. And I really enjoy that. It can be tough with kids. So I have a 9-year-old and a 3-year-old. The 9-year-old is a spectacular traveler. Actually, she's here with me in Chicago. And so I try to bring her to things, but she has to go to school every once in a while. I will say, I took the month of November, I called it a mini sabbatical, but I noticed that I was growing apart from my daughter. She was getting into tween things. And so I took her, and she and I moved to the Florida Keys for a month. And when you're an academic, you can do that. If you've got your grants and so on, nobody really cares. And I Skyped with my lab. And the other thing I learned was that if you have, I might get 300 emails a day. And if I'm sitting in my office staring at the computer, I'll answer them as they come in. But if you only check your email early in the morning and late in the evening, it turns out that about 290 of them work themselves out by the end of the day. So there'd be this long interchange of people going back and forth, very upset about something or other, 30 emails, whatever, and the last email is, thanks everybody, I'm glad we worked that out. So then I'd send this sort of professorial email about how, yeah, exactly. So, so I think that's not a lesson at all. But one of the things I really like about academics is that you have this tremendous flexibility and you can do a whole lot of different things. So I guess maybe one more question and then we'll open it up to the audience. And I guess I would ask, sort of where do you see your career going? Because one of the benefits that I've found in healthcare is that once you start doing one thing, you can shift a lot, or you can become more administrative, or more clinical, or you can move from one area of expertise and policy to another. And so, do you see yourself doing this until you get a golden watch at 75 and retire, or do you think you might change around? Ariel, maybe you want to start?
Sure. Well, so just a little anecdote before I say that. So a few years ago, my mom had been working on a project that was grant funded, and the grant funding ended, and so she had to figure out what her next job was going to be, and it was anticipated. So she didn't feel like she lost her job, and I was home, and I said, this is kind of exciting. This gives you the opportunity to really start fresh and think about what you want to do. What do you want to do? And she was like, I don't know. And I thought, oh my goodness. On the one hand, that's kind of depressing that you could still not know what you want to do, in your 50s, but also kind of liberating, right? It's okay if I don't totally know now. She doesn't know, at her age. So that's to say, you are going to make a big decision, when you leave Chicago about where you're going to go and what path you're going to take. But this sort of taking the next step happens throughout your career. And so, even since I've been in grad school, I've been, facing that decision of kind of how to, what next lily pad to jump onto. So, I really like working in the government. I feel it sort of stokes my sense of civic duty. And so, I wouldn't mind, continuing where I am or going to other parts of the government, because each one has its strengths and strengths and its drawbacks. But one of the things that I have been exposed to since being in the government is sort of the pace of change in the government and the pace of change in other places that are not the government. And Medicare is working really hard now to sort of think about ways to do things a little differently, pay providers in different ways to try to get them to be more efficient, to provide better quality. And it's clunky because the government has all these rules about how it has to work, and I look out into the environment and see hospitals and health systems and insurance companies kind of pushing the envelope on their own in a little more flexible way. So I could also see myself going into kind of the private sector, as you call it, to a health system or hospital. And one thing I sort of struggle with is, am I will I always be their kind of government relations person? Is my skill set the kind of that I know about how government works? Or, you know, is my skill set kind of the writing and problem solving and, you know, program management that I do in the government role? And so I don't know. And some days I think I should like drop it all and do yoga teaching full time. I also have a cooking blog, and sometimes I think about like opening a cafe or a hot dog stand. So who knows? Who knows?
So I think it's kind of interesting, this question. I thought about it, but sometimes healthcare can be a little bit different than when you're in the business world, where a lot of times there's kind of this clear ladder of, you know, you're going up, up, up to get to this point. And sometimes in healthcare, and in particular my job, sometimes there's not always that clear ladder. So for example, for me, if I wanted to, let's say, take that step up in the pay scale or kind of the title scale, I really would have to go into administration. And some people would really enjoy that. I know that about myself. I personally hate confrontation. I don't really like dealing with the kind of bureaucratic red tape, you know, all that kind of having to deal with that sort of thing. So for me, I've had to kind of think about, all right, so how do I set goals for myself and stay motivated if I don't want to become an administrator? Because I could keep doing the same thing for the next 30 years and be fine, but you know, so it is interesting when you're someone who's used to setting goals for yourself. So I think for me, you know, moving forward, I just kind of want to be the best in what I do. And what's really nice about, you know, occupational therapy is you can always change. So you don't have to pick a specialty and stick with it. So if I do start to feel like, you know what, I'm kind of getting in a rut and maybe I'm not like showing the best of myself, you know, I can switch. Maybe I say, all right, I want to switch gears and I want to go into a rehab unit. Or I would like to, even within my job, maybe I'm tired of kind of working with this autism population. I want to work with kids with severe and profound physical disabilities and kind of go more that route. So kind of within the profession, there's ways to kind of reignite yourself, even if you don't have that, I guess, you know, promotion that you're shooting for. There's still ways to kind of feel like you're making professional growth, even if it's not a title or a, you know, a pay bump. So that's kind of hard for people to kind of grasp sometimes. But so yeah, so I think for me, I just want to stay with what I'm passionate about. And if I feel like I'm starting to burn out, maybe not giving the best of myself, then yeah, maybe it's time to kind of switch and go somewhere else. So I'm kind of feeling that passion again. So
there are a couple paths that I could take in the future. One of them just related to this chief medical informatics officer position that lends itself to getting more involved in administration, and then some people will go CMIO to chief medical officer, and then maybe CEO of a hospital. I have no interest in being CEO of a hospital, and having seen what our chief medical officer does, I doubt I'd be interested in that, particularly because it seems like there is a lot of complaining emails that he gets, and I would like to just answer those in the evening saying, after they've sorted it out, good job. In neurosurgery, in clinical neurosurgery, you often then, if you have an interest, become division head of your practice group, and then maybe even department chair. Those are some of the things that I had thought about doing as a resident and things that I'm still interested in doing now. But I don't know where things are going, and I'm not at the point in my career where I have been asked to be a division head at other places. There weren't places that I wanted to live, but the guy who trained me said, never turn down a job you haven't been offered. So I went and looked, and so that was a good experience. And then I used his line, which was, this isn't exactly what I'm looking for, thank you. So I think that there are lots of options. I would be very happy continuing where I am now, but as you said, once you get tired of doing something, I have options, and if I find that as healthcare changes that it becomes so terrible that I don't want to practice in it, then that was part of why I took on the job of CMIO, is that there are 1 million people running around who did a little bit of electronic healthcare work health record work, and then they are now consultants. And so that is something that I could also do. And those guys have great work-life balance, and having seen some of the invoices for things, I think they get paid pretty well. So in this day and age, you don't want to go into, I told everyone, you don't go into healthcare for the money. That was something that you probably did when my dad was a physician, but not now. Because if that's your goal, you will be very disappointed, because it's constantly changing, and then you'll be constantly worrying, and then you'll have an ulcer, and you'll live not as long. So don't do it.
So I think that's a point worth getting back to, because the finances around healthcare are worth spending a minute or two on. But I'll just say that, so I think what we've heard is that, even 5, 10, 20 years out from graduating from college, we're all in positions where we're really comfortable with what we do. And you're already starting to think about, well, what could I do next? What might be different? What might be better? What might, the way I like to think about it is, how can I expand my impact? Because I want to make a contribution, and that contribution might be bigger if I was a division head, or it might be a lot less because I spend all day dealing with the budget of the division and not actually helping any patients or doing any science and so on. And so you're constantly rethinking what you want to do. I think the idea of hanging up a shingle after you finish medical school and just having a practice for 45 years is essentially non-existent anymore. And people do, and we're the kinds of people, we're maroons, so we're the kinds of people who are constantly inquisitive and want to push ourselves a little bit. So around the finances of healthcare, I'll make a comment and I'll let anybody else say what they want. I agree. If you want to be rich, you are in the wrong place. That's not what going into healthcare is about. You should go in finance or something like that. Nonetheless, people who have these kinds of degrees don't starve. And in fact, we do quite well, many of us, and we have quite comfortable lives, and we have a lot of job security, and we're respected members of the community, and we're doing something that we think is really important. But we are constantly compared to the way it was a generation or 2 generations ago, when people really could make 7 figures, or and we're paying the price a little bit for that. But I'll open it up to any other thoughts.
Yeah, I think my dad had actually tried to talk me out of going into medicine, and then tried to talk me out of going into surgery, because he said healthcare's changing, it's not like what it was. But he had the benefit of knowing the history of healthcare, and I came into it new, so I wouldn't start off with regret. And so I'm actually probably at a point in my career now where I'll be saying, oh my God, medicine's changing, it's not like it used to be. I walked uphill both ways, to school and so on. But the point of that is, I would be really sad knowing how I feel now that I didn't get to this point. And so I'm thrilled to be in medicine. I still love it, even though I hate having to deal with insurance companies and having to call and sit on hold while someone then says to me, what's the patient's medical record number? Why do you want to order this test? We're only going to approve this little portion. But that's a very small part of my day, and I usually am eating pretzels when that happens, so that's fine. So,
and I get to see it sort of from the big picture standpoint. So I have meetings with lots of people who say, you're not paying enough for me to stay in business, or my hospital to stay in business, and have the tough job of explaining to really well-intentioned healthcare providers that the Medicare benefit is an entitlement for the beneficiary, that the Medicare program isn't a jobs program for every small hospital in the whole country. And when you think about governing a big program for the whole country, you have to think about, like, well, what do we need to pay for to ensure that the beneficiaries have their access and to high quality care, and not that we're just propping up everything. And then we see that with the way that healthcare spending is increasing, now it's slowed some, but the way that has increased, Medicare spending is mandatory spending, which means the federal government, any dollar that comes from Medicare, they have to spend it. But we only have so much money, and so the more the Medicare program spending grows, the more spending for other programs is crowded out. So then we don't have money for things like education or roads or everything else. And so it does lead you to say, are we getting the best spend? And I think it's one thing I really like about doing the work that I do is getting to interact with doctors who both know what it's like to be with a patient and to try to have to figure out like, well, what does my patient need today, and to treat the condition that they have, but also the big picture, and to say, do we need to be using the newest thing that we're not sure if it's better than the old thing, or do we need to order another scan? Can we use the scan from some other doctor, and how can we get the quality that we want by being mindful of the resource use? And Medicare is obviously a program only for the aged and disabled, but I don't know how many of you have been following the news stories about people trying to sign up for the new healthcare exchanges. So people who didn't have insurance before, insurance was too expensive. The more there's excess spending in the private healthcare market, the more those premiums are, and so that hits all of our families. And greater share of what we spend on healthcare, of what we spend on our whole budgets, is healthcare every year, and that starts to crowd out all the other things that you might want to spend as an individual. And so I get to just to share that big picture perspective on the financing side.
Okay, well, we've given you, I think, kind of our perspectives, and maybe we should open it up to questions. You may not be thinking about what happens 20 years from now. You may be thinking about what happens 20 minutes from now. So please feel free to come up to the microphones, and let's not have silence.
So you were talking a little bit about the finance there, and my question kind of related to that is about medical school and the cost of medical school. I was curious about all of your opinions on going on to further education, in particular medical school. You said that you commented about how medicine is not what it used to be, but that being said, the cost of medical school keeps going up like it is like that. So I wanted to know what your opinion on that is, what's your advice, how much debt do you guys recommend going into, things like that.
So I think this is a complicated question. There are people who can give more wizened advice, certainly, than I can. My sense is that if you want to go to medical school and then really think you'd like to be a primary care physician in the outskirts of Topeka, or work in sub-Saharan Africa, and you're going to make $50,000 a year or something like that, then you're going to have trouble paying off your debt. But in most other situations, you're going to be fine, even if you have $500,000 of debt. And if you decide to go into science, or you decide to do certain programs, there are NIH repayment loan programs that can help quite a bit. And it may take quite some time until you pay it off, but I think that there are very few scenarios where it makes more sense to do something other than what you want to do with your life, just because you're gonna have this debt. And as scary as it is, I would counsel you that that's just part of the process.
This is still a very fresh wound for me. I didn't go to medical school, so I did save myself 2 years of tuition. So I will say I can't speak to exactly medical school, but it's a tough and it's a scary thing when you get out and you look at this number and you go, whew. But what I will say, and this is something that has really helped me, first of all, kind of picking a job. You want to pick what you love, but for example, I knew that OT had a very strong market, so that kind of helped. Like, okay, I know I have job security, so I'm getting into something that I will be able to pay it off. Who knows how long it'll take, but I have that job security. But also really doing your research on the programs out there for people with loans. So there is something called public service loan forgiveness, and if you make 120 payments while working in a public service, so it could be a public hospital, it could be like for me in the schools, it could be a non-for-profit medical organization, then you make your payments for 10 years and then the rest goes away. So that's something for me all of a sudden like, oh wow, I only have to have this burden for 10 years. And that feels a lot better. So there are so many things out there like that that I really, really urge you to do your research on, okay, I may not be stuck with these loans for 30 years. Maybe there's a way that I can kind of work around it. So I really just urge you to kind of do your research into that because that made things feel a lot better.
Yeah, I should also say the median income in 2012 for an oncologist, and oncologists don't make the most of anyone, but they do fairly well, in the U.S. was $512,000 a year. And so we're not talking about people being in poverty. A generation before adjusted, it might have been twice that, and a generation from now adjusted, it might be half that. But we're really not talking about people struggling to get by who go through medical training. And surgery, we assume all you guys you have your own banks.
Yeah, I should have been an oncologist hearing that number. But I think the median income for, I think, a pediatrician was somewhere in the upper hundreds. So it's not, the reality is that a number of my classmates and students now are making decisions based on debt as to how they choose their field. Ideally, you should choose what you love, but sometimes you love not being in debt. And so that might sway you, but I think a combination of the programs that are out there and your choice, and my own personal feeling is that it is like healthcare, as in it can't continue this way. It may not benefit you, may not benefit my twins, but it'll benefit someone someday, that there'll be a cap on it, or that you will go to school and they may require some service out of you so that your tuition is covered. An example is my brother was an MD PhD, and so his tuition was free because of his MD PhD program. And he is now not using the PhD at all, and is in private practice in orthopedics. But at the time, that's what he wanted to do, and that actually helped him. So there are ways around it, but it's not going to go away right now.
Hello, my question is, how do you think changing technology will impact jobs in healthcare? For example, treating kids with neuromuscular disorders or performing neurosurgery? Do you think it might shorten the operation time? Conversely, how have you seen it change over the years in the past? Thank you.
So there are a lot of the inroads in technology have helped minimize, the goal is to try to minimize the inpatient time and improve the wear and tear on the patient, and then hopefully improve outcome in all of that. I think that there are several areas of technology that that are advancing. One of them that I happen to know about is like for health information. And what's been apparent is that technology itself won't fix the problem. And in fact, we had this phrase in Virginia that a fool with a tool is still a fool. And so just because we have, say, a great electronic health record doesn't mean that we're using it well. So there has to be actually thought put into this technology and how to use it. And we've seen in neurosurgery, we see a ton of new technology come out. Everyone adopts it, and so you get a real spike in its use, and then it figures out where it belongs, as in the true indication. So for example, everyone was doing, for spine surgery way back in the day, they were putting in all of this instrumentation. Then they found out, well, actually not everyone needed it, so now only the patients that need it hopefully get it. There is obviously abuse in things that I'm sure you've come across every day. And so I think that is the real thing about technology, is that it's advancing. You need to know how to manage it and make sure that you just don't use it willy-nilly.
I think technology has actually been a huge thing in the rehabilitation world, especially for, once again, our clients with, spinal cord injuries or acquired brain injury, things where we're finding so many more tools for them to be using in their everyday lives. Especially, we're also finding it, for example, like you mentioned with children, more specifically with autism, we're seeing how iPads are opening up their world to be used as communication devices, to be used as we know that these kids love technology, so they're finally connecting with something they're really passionate about. So I think the technology boom has been huge in the rehab world, and within that, it's actually created jobs. For example, we have assistive technology, just specialists like in our companies, in our districts, who their main thing is we come to them and say, this is where we're not meeting the child's needs, what kind of technology can we use? And just like you mentioned, we can give the kid the tool. Just because you give them an iPad doesn't mean it's the people have to commit to working with it and learning with it. And that's really difficult because there are some people who've been around for a very long time and they want to do things the way they've done things and they're not ready to embrace the technology. So that's kind of a challenge, but it's definitely, I think, making the field better for our kids and the people we service. It's really exciting, but it's, once again, you can't take out the people element. It's always got to be monitored and, evaluated. Is this really better than the old-fashioned way? Just because it's shiny and new and sparkly.
So everything I do is about technology, and that's what discovery science is trying to adopt the latest technology to discover things as quickly as possible. Many of you are familiar with sequencing of the genome. The original genome cost $6 billion and involved over 2,000 scientists, and now you can sequence a genome on a machine that would fit on this desk in 7 hours for about $5,000. It's really unbelievable. And so the more you can adopt that technology, I think the more you can drive your science. Where I work at the Dana-Farber and the Brigham and Women's, I think there's a strong push to implement technology, and that allows them to do things like face transplants, or we actually cured cases of AIDS using bone marrow transplantation. And so there's this idea that if you can dream it, you can try it. And we also have strong relationships with MIT, and their development of technology, especially biomedical engineering, is really incredible. So it allows us to take individual cells and interrogate them for either genotype or phenotype alterations. And so you can study cancer in a way that you really couldn't before. And I think if you become a Luddite and you don't keep pushing to try to implement technology as much as possible every day, then you're going to fall behind the field.
Thank you all for being able to make it here today. My question specifically for Dr. Alden is, as a computer science major, do you feel that there's a place in the medical establishment, the sort of MD, physician medical establishment, for quantitatively trained people? Or do you get this feeling that, oh, I'm surrounded by biologists, I maybe don't belong here?
Well, I think that some of the best physicians that I've worked with were not biology majors. They were philosophy. They were so to answer your question, there would certainly be a place for you there, and you would definitely contribute to it. And in fact, one of my classmates is probably one of the smartest human beings I think on this planet that I know. He is a math major. His son became ill, and then he studied all the papers, and he knew the literature better than the physicians he was consulting with. So he's very quantitative, and so I think that there would be certainly a role there. And then there are hybrid jobs out there, for example, people who have computer science backgrounds who then take an interest in, say, the electronic health record, and then they advise physicians, or they become physicians themselves and work for those companies. So, yes.
I have a question about the growing field of medical ethics. I'm wondering how it affects your practice, perhaps how you think about new implementations of the law, how you teach the students who follow you or who shadow you in the hospital. Thank you.
Medical ethics has not been a major influence on my practice. There are isolated incidences where we will have a patient and then someone will want an ethics consult. And I don't know, I can tell you how people feel. I don't share this view, But people will say, oh, great, we're going to have them involved. They'll spend hours talking about it, and then we'll get nowhere. And then they'll just say, do what the family says. But so I haven't had direct experience with medical ethics in that regard. So I don't think I can totally answer your question. I mean, there was a second part where you said about students following the law. Did you say?
I can say two different ways. The first is like Tor was talking about. So I do bone marrow transplantation, and about 50% of patients, give or take, who undergo a bone marrow transplant are cured of their disease, and the other 50% die. And so we go through that process with every patient, and you can't tell anyone that they're going to be cured until they come back 5 years later and they're doing great. And I think when we do involve ethicists, commonly it's around this issue of things are going poorly and there's a disconnect between families and the patients and the doctors and our concepts. And almost always it comes down to communication. Almost always. Everyone is rational, emotional and upset and so on, but rational, and it's all about communication. And so I've found ethicists who've been very, very helpful, and it's because they can facilitate really good communication. The other is in the research realm, and both in the clinical research realm and then also in the basic. There are a lot of ethical questions around sequencing people's genomes. So, if I knew the 3 billion nucleotide sequence of my genome, that information would be very valuable to my health insurance company because they might know that I had a gene that predisposed me to X or Y. There's questions around that. There's questions around whether if we develop a mouse model based on someone's cancer, and then we understand anything about that, what does that mean to who owns that property? If we can use that and commercialize and make a drug from it, who should benefit from those things? And so, in fact, we go through what's called the Institutional Review Board for all of our research, and on that board are more than one ethicist who really are versed in these kinds of questions. And what does it mean to a community that we're doing this kind of research, and what's fair? And I can tell you that it's constantly a pain in my ass, but it's undoubtedly the right thing to do. And we have in the back of our mind what's called the Boston Globe test, but it could be the Chicago Tribune test or something like that. Is, would you want this story on the cover of the Boston Globe saying that you're doing this? Or would you know that you were in trouble because it was on the cover of the Boston Globe? And we need our ethicists to, I think, help us with that.
Sure, and I would say, on the one, there are grand philosophical debates about the role of government in society. And I think sometimes people look at people like me, a member of the Congress, as like these Washington pinheads that are just telling everybody what they should do and how they should do it. And you kind of see this push and pull, like when we see problems that are existing out in the country for Medicare beneficiaries or things that seem like they're not going right in healthcare, there's a desire to want to change things, and we have the levers of laws and payment policy to try to do that. But you don't want to go so far as to be telling people what's the right thing for them. That you want to leave those most personal healthcare decisions to families and physicians, and there's a fine line. And one thing we see a lot of times is a struggle between wanting to pay for the most efficient care and the best quality care. And so in some ways, Medicare might want to try to steer patients to see certain types of providers because we think it'd be better for them and better for the program overall. On the other hand, there is a tenet in the Medicare program that patients should have free choice of providers. They should get to see anyone they want to see. And so that kind of like, we know what's good for you versus, like you have to be the one to live with your decisions is kind of that tension that we face every day. And I think it's, common to, a lot of public policy making is sort of navigating that tension.
Hi, I have a question for Drs. Weinstock and Dr. Alden, specifically Dr. Alden, since you're involved in medical informatics. So with the expanded use of electronic health records in hospitals, there's been some concern that it's going to affect the doctor-patient relationship. What's been your experience with that? And do you think that there should be training with electronic health records in medical school? Thank you.
Yeah, so that, so the first, I'm going to answer the last part first, and that is there is medical informatics is a growing field, and in fact it's becoming a board specialty. And so there's a lot of that training. We're actually in the process of trying to develop a training program for our residents in our hospital and so on. I was actually, Lurie Children's, formerly Children's Memorial, instituted, they were an all paper record when I got there, and now we're all electronic. So that has changed a lot of workflows, dynamics between the patients. Some providers will sit at the computer and then the patient and family is here, and they'll be like, okay, so then what happened? And they'll be typing away in there. I've never liked typing with my back to the patient. In fact, I don't like to type at all when I'm talking to the patient. So because I feel like it's an interview, it's like kind of like a time where we're catching up. So I will face them and talk with them, and but then I'm kind of hurt because I have extra time to work on my charts and that kind of stuff after clinic is over. So there are lots of changes, and what would be ideal is if someone would scribe, or maybe the computer could listen, and while I'm talking, I would then look up, I would have a transcript of our conversation, and then I would say, hey, order an MRI of the brain, thanks, and send a letter to such and such, right?
I mean, that's not that far away. It's
No,
really not.
no,
I mean,
we are actually working on voice, we have, the voice recognition software is actually quite good now, and so we're, that's happening, and if you really invest the time up front to do that, you can actually control your whole computer with your voice. So to your point, it's here. We can do it. It's just that, as an example, the cost per physician for that is, Dragon will train physicians, and they will charge you between $3,000 and $6,000 per physician to do that, which in this healthcare environment is impossible.
yeah, so I mean, even 10 years ago, if a patient had a rash, I would try to draw it, on the piece of paper in the chart, and I'm a horrible drawer. And now you just snap a picture with your iPhone and, email it in, and you pop it in the medical record, and, that kind of advancement of technology is happening like this.
And, I mean, I'll just chime in, from the consumer perspective. So a few years ago, my family joined up with an HMO health plan that's kind of all employed doctors. You go to one medical center and they have everything there. So the primary care, the specialist, the lab is there, the imaging is there, everything's there. And so, I take my kid one night to the urgent care, and the very next morning the pediatrician calls me up and says, I saw that Rafi was in urgent care last night, what's going on? Or when I was pregnant, I had to go and see a perinatologist, for some concerns they had. And that person had all of my ultrasounds, all of my test results. And, from a consumer perspective, I think it's awesome that, your doctors are connected to one another, that you can access, the information. Like, I never have to, track down some random piece of paper about, to say what vaccines my kid got. They're all in there. And it makes, I think, as a, I really appreciate informed healthcare consumers, it really makes you, much more engaged in the process. And I spend a whole lot less time on the phone eating pretzels, waiting, for somebody to, to pick up the phone to, fax me, a copy of the vaccine record, or fax my prescription. It's all together. And so, as from the consumer standpoint, when it works well, it's really great.
Which, the healthcare information technology is great, but now I have patients asking if they can friend me on Facebook. All right, maybe one more question.
Hi, thank you for coming. My question is, how do you kind of deal with the emotional side? Like, do you ever have just a really hard day where you just,
Never.
want to, but just, I guess, in general, is it, how do you deal kind of with the emotional side or getting maybe too attached to a patient? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. I think this has been something that I had to learn early. When I did one of my first rotations at the UIC inpatient psych unit, working with very intense adolescents, I was finding I was going home and I was not able to leave things at the door. And, you become invested, and especially in my job, I'll work with kids for 3 or 4 years. So you become very invested in these families and these kids. And you have to celebrate the successes, and that's, I think, what makes it worth it. You are going to have days where you go home and you just, it sits in that pit of your stomach, and you know, it doesn't quite go away for a while. But then when you have those positive moments, you know, we joke, my husband, I come home and I'm like, oh, this kid wrote his name. He's like, great. I'm like, no, it took us a year to get there, you know. So it's just keeping those successes in your mind as well, and just remembering that, you know, you're doing the best you can, you're human, and it's difficult, but it's worth it.
So I think that I can actually answer this two ways. One is pre-kids and post-kids. The pre-kid answer was you really have to think in your mind that people are better off with you than without you. And that still drives me today, because we see a lot of terrible things. And so there's that. But then you can't help but it creeps in there. And when it does, you just have to kind of let it get in there, root around, and then make sure you show at the door. The post-kid answer is, now I find myself looking at some kids and saying, wow, you know, Gray is that age, and wow, look at the difference, and it just makes me appreciate more what I have. And then you know, I recently lost a sister to cancer this past summer, and so now I kind of, especially in oncology, if I see someone who I know has a very bad disease, it really gets in there, and I don't go to the operating room riled up, so I make sure that I'm level-headed, and so that I can concentrate. And you really kind of have to compartmentalize that a little bit.
So I only do 20% clinical, and I think part of it is maybe that I have the opportunity to do a lot of other things, and that I don't allow it to overwhelm me. But if I were a practicing oncologist and seeing patients with cancer 100% of the time, I think, you know, I'd have to have a couple of very good psychiatrists to go to. When I was an intern, you know, then you're working 80, 100 hours a week, and you're totally overwhelmed intellectually and emotionally, and you're sleep deprived and so on. And I've said this before in this forum, and it makes Cass go to sort of cringe, but you're reduced to sort of your primal urges, right? So sleep, food, and sex, and that's all you care about. And then you get through that, and then it actually starts getting easier from there.
And I would say on the flip side, in Washington, you often have to remind people that Medicare beneficiaries are people, you know, and that there are stories behind those dollars that we track, and families, and you know, I have the opposite job of, you know, when people talk about cases, like those are people, those are individuals, and you know, thinking about how policy decisions affect, you know, individuals and families is something that we constantly have to remind people to do.
All right, well, thank you. I think most of us will mill around afterwards, and we're happy to chat. We are here for you. We're resources. We wouldn't have come here and spent our Saturday afternoons if we didn't actually really care. So please feel free to use us, and our emails are available in the materials, and good luck with everything.